Welcome to CSIS Online. The way we bring you events is changing, but we'll still present live analysis and award-winning digital media from our Dracopolis Ideas Lab. All on your time, live or on demand. This is CSIS Online.
Ladies and gentlemen, greetings and welcome to this event on spurring private investment in Africa. We are delighted that you could join us this morning. My name is Mvemba Pezo Bizolele. I'm a senior fellow and the director of the Africa Program here at the Center for Strategic and International Studies. This event is made possible through a partnership with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Japan. We would like to thank the ministry for the generous support. I am truly honored to welcome our panelists today. Leslie Marbury is the Acting Chief Operating Officer at Prosper Africa. Mimi Alemayo is the Senior Vice President for Public-Private Partnership at MasterCard. Ken Shibusawa is the founder of Shibusawa and Company. And David Bamlango is the General Counsel and Deputy Group Managing Director at the Trade and Development Bank Group. Welcome all. Much has been said and written about the resources, business and investment opportunities that Africa offers. It suffices to say that the continent has tremendous potential in sectors such as renewable energy, mining, agriculture, healthcare, and technology. Africa, in other words, is at the intersection of global demand and supply dynamics. With a young and growing population approaching 2 billion people, Africa has an expanding middle class with an increasing purchasing power. African youth represent an important labor pool, which, if offered the right training and support, could help alleviate the pressures of aging populations in other parts of the world. The continent is a market no serious investor can afford to ignore for long. Still, investment levels do not match the continent's potential. We ask why. Today, we would like to speak about its potential, the opportunities, the risks, and what should be done to address the inefficiencies and barriers that prevent this potential from turning into an economic boom and benefit Africans and their partners. We also would like to hear about what is being done and what is working. Our agenda will unfold as follows. First, we'll hear from our panelists in the orders in which they will be introduced. I will then moderate an exchange with them. And finally, we will open the lines for questions from the audience. Leslie Marbury joined Prosper Africa as the Acting Chief Operating Officer in July 2021. Most recently, she completed a tour as the Mission Director in Rwanda and Burundi, and her previous posts include Honduras, Bolivia, South Africa, and Burma. Leslie is a career member of the Senior Foreign Service and gained a formative experience as a U.S. Peace Corps volunteer in Ghana. Welcome, Leslie. Mimi Alemayo is the Senior Vice President for Public and Private Partnerships at MasterCard. Before joining MasterCard, Ms. Alemayo was the Managing Director and a member of the Board of Directors for Black Rhino Group, an investment platform focused on development and acquisition of energy and infrastructure assets across Africa. Ms. Alemayo has previously served as Executive Vice President of the U.S. Overseas Private Investment Corporation and as United States Executive Director of the Africa Development Bank. Ken Shibusawa is recognized as Japan's leading voice on stakeholder capitalism. He is CEO and strategic advisor, is the CEO of strategic advisory firm Shibusawa and Company, which he founded in 2001, and chairman of mutual fund Commons Asset Management, which he founded in 2008. He serves as director of Keizai Doyukai, the Japan Association of Corporate Executives, as a steering committee member of UNDP SDG Impact, an advisor to the Office of the President of the University of Tokyo, and as a visiting professor at Seikei University. David Bamlango, David Bamlango is Deputy Group Managing Director and General Counsel of TDB Group and is the bank's Chief Legal Officer, advising the bank's management and governing bodies on various legal, regulatory, and policy issues and managing its legal services department. David serves as co-chairman of several statutory committees, including the bank's New Deal Forum and Corporate Credit Committee. Welcome, all panelists. Africa has been called the new frontier. Others have called it the future of the world. The continent is rich in resources. Among these resources, we count the world's youngest population, which translates into important human resources. Africa is also replete with natural and mineral resources. Many of these are critical for the world's transition to greener energy. Still, for several reasons, including counterproductive national and international policies, armed conflict, political and financial risks, and ignorance among investors, the continent has struggled to attract the level of capital flow that matches its vast potential. What is the state of private investment in Africa today? How do you evaluate the investment potential of the continent? Let's start with Leslie Marbury, then Mimi Alimayo, followed by Ken Chibusawa, and finally David Bamlango. Leslie Marbury, welcome, and you have the floor.
Good morning. And first, just let me thank you, Mvemba, and CSIS Africa for inviting me to participate on this timely panel. I say it's timely because earlier this month, I traveled to the continent visiting Nigeria, Kenya, and South Africa with my colleagues from the State Department. And the focus of that was really on how do we increase investment into Africa and how do we mobilize U.S. capital. One of the areas we were looking at is how do we change the narrative on Africa? We were looking at how do we make the change the narrative where people are often seeing this death, despair, and disease and shine a light instead on all of the incredible opportunities that Africa offers. And we did that in a number of ways. Throughout the trip, we heard from American investors on what they were looking for that would help them expand and accelerate. And things that rose to the top for me is, of course, how they wanted to better access to some of the U.S. government tools, how they needed more support on policy and regulatory challenges, and how they, in general, just needed more information on how to evaluate their risk. I was very struck by what was working. We engaged with many companies in Kenya that have been able to expand and accelerate their investment using some of the U.S. government tools, including access to DFC and USAID. And I think that those types of tools, when targeted, can be extremely effective. We also engaged with a number of African companies, of extremely innovative entrepreneurial companies that were looking for additional finance. Of course, our focus was looking at U.S. capital. They were looking for financing from DFC and USAID, but also some of our other tools that you don't hear about as much of for the US ADF and others. And we saw, again, some of the things that are working. I was really excited to meet with some local asset managers that we have been supporting, particularly women-led fund managers who are receiving some assistance from the U.S. and have been able to expand the capital that they're getting to women entrepreneurs. So I would say a couple of my takeaways is there are incredible investment opportunities that African entrepreneurs offer, especially around the digital and creative sectors, which was a big focus of our trip. There seemed to be a gap after folks have gone through raising Series A as they start moving into Series B and C, where they need additional help raising capital. And my second takeaway is that investment on the continent is certainly happening. We've seen Google commit $1 billion of investment. We've seen Harlem Capital help raise $3 million for Paridi in Kenya. We've seen Amazon just signing its first deal with African studios and bringing a lot of investment along. And we know that this is a response to a number of factors, from the youthful population you mentioned, from the increasingly urban population, from the increased connectivity on the continent, and from the resilience that African markets have shown throughout COVID. So I see a tremendous opportunities in Africa and look forward to the discussion.
Thank you very much, Leslie. Now we turn to Madame Mimi Alemayo, please.
Thank you, Vemba, and thank you, CSIS Africa, for having me today, but for also having this really important discussion. I like the way you framed the question, Vemba, and it's true. I think the continent has not attracted the levels of capital flow to match its potential. And I think that's a fact. I tend to agree also with a lot of what Leslie has just already said, but also observed from her recent trip to West Africa, I believe. At least where I sit at MasterCard, we have been really, sort of active across the continent for a very long time. And over the past decade, MasterCard has actually expanded its operations in Africa to dozens of new markets across the continent, and we continue to do that. And we have not even slowed down during the pandemic in terms of our expansion. In fact, I think I would say a lot of people may find this surprising, but the pandemic has actually accelerated the shift to all things digital and has expanded our work with both governments and businesses that are looking to digitize. And we are increasingly partnering with a lot of African banks. We're partnering with the many fintechs. Leslie mentioned there's a lot of innovation going across the continent, mobile network operators, ag techs, health techs, in order to expand our work. And I think these local partnerships are incredibly valuable and are helping us reach places where we wouldn't reach. And together with these partners, we've actually brought millions of people into the digital payment network, and we'll continue to do that. The part of our work actually that's kind of exciting to me is that MasterCard is also being very sort of intentional in trying to reach everyone, and therefore investing in that last mile effort, just making sure that we're reaching the most marginalized communities that may not have reliable connectivity today. We know Google and many others are investing on that, but not everybody has sort of access to reliable internet, or even, as we know, to reliable access to power. And some don't even have some, a real form of ID and that are functioning basically outside of the formal economy. We want to make sure we reach all of those people, and through a product we call Community Pass, which is basically a digital rail that was created specifically with that environment in mind. And we're now live in several markets across Africa. We're doing, sort of our best to serve everyone. But it's also being smart, to be honest with you, and to be candid. As a business, it's a large population that is not being served, and we saw that as an opportunity. And we've also realized agriculture is such an important sector for the African continent, because a significant portion of the population is directly involved in agriculture. And I know when you think of MasterCard, you don't think of MasterCard being in agriculture, but we are actually working to digitize the agriculture value chain. with a product called Farm Pass across Africa, ensuring farmers get paid more, they're getting paid faster, and more importantly, I think they're linked to financial services so they can have access to credit. And in the process, just bringing a lot of transparency to the ag value chain as we digitize it. And lastly, I would just say to your question, just in general about the state of private investment in Africa, and Leslie sort of alluded to that a lot. Last year was a record year for investment flows into the startup space, particularly into fintech. Over $5 billion was invested, and a lot of it coming from Silicon Valley. And this year, we're like, end of first quarter, and I think we've seen about $1.3 billion invested already. So this really gives me hope that the innovation taking place across Africa is actually finally getting noticed from private sector, particularly American Silicon Valley VC firms. There's obviously a lot of room, I think, to grow. And at MasterCard, obviously, we have a long-term perspective and we'll continue to invest. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mimi Alemayo. That's definitely not what I expected to hear, that MasterCard is involved in agriculture and digitizing that supply chain. So already we're off to some good start with new insights on what's happening in that space. David, the floor is yours now. Thank you.
Many thanks, Vemba, and thank you to CSIS Africa indeed for this generous invitation for me to join this esteemed panel. At TDB, we are very focused on driving private investment in Africa, because Africa is our market. It's our only market. It's where we operate. So we are bound to chase that holy grail of the moment when private investment in Africa, private companies in Africa will become even more important than government as a share of the African economies. So we finance as a bank both public and private sector by mandate. We are a policy lender, and we finance trade and infrastructure. And we like the fact that we play in both, because we think that on the trade side, we are meeting immediate needs of our member states and the populations as a whole, their day-to-day demand for fuel, fertilizer, and pharmaceuticals and the likes. And on the infrastructure side, we are playing a crucial role in bringing to bear the development of core infrastructure that are needed in order to enable private investment. So we have been focusing a lot in unlocking blended finance solutions that can allow us to finance PPP type projects. Because a lot of the donor money will tend to come directly to the Ministry of Finance through some vehicles that either rely on the government as a borrower. And yet we appreciate that the government's borrowing capacities are constrained in Africa. So donors, funders, all of us have to figure out how to channel the largest part of capital through private sector. Because our government just cannot borrow the way other governments are able to borrow immediately to finance their deficit or to finance their infrastructure developments. So figuring out innovative solutions, innovative structures for developing PPP type projects or for developing promising sponsors in bringing to life projects that would have seemed impossible is a core focus for us at TDB. And we are grateful that we've been successful in unlocking some funding with partners like the World Bank and MIGA, which are directly targeting infrastructure projects and off-grid type power projects, which are carried by the private sector. And we are seeing a lot of dynamism in that space. We are seeing a lot of projects come our way. We are already funding and reviewing several such projects, but the demand far outpaces the capacity to finance. As speakers before me have properly acknowledged, the demand far outpaces the money that is available. And we are therefore always looking for new partnerships because it will take innovative partnerships to unlock the growth in investment by the private sector. And we are also trying at TDB to diversify the support of the private sector. We appreciate that a lot of the capital coming from the West will tend to go after certain sectors that they are familiar with or most comfortable with, fintech and various tech-based solutions and so forth. However, the demands go beyond that. Some countries just need roads. They need roads to go from point A to point B. And those roads can be built on PPP structures to the extent that you can put in place tolling solutions or provide some funding solutions that can securitize the toll proceeds and be able to raise money on the capital markets or raise money domestically, for example. So some of those core infrastructure require massive creative funding solutions that require a lot of partnerships and to be able to think them through. So at TDB, we try to think beyond the immediate that people may think about, to think seriously about the enabling type solutions, the enabling type investment. And because this is our market and we have to reach all our member states, at TDB we have 22 member states and we are expanding into other countries, including in West Africa. I mean, we not all our member states have reached the same level of economic development. Some are middle economies, others are post-conflict countries. So different levels of challenges that you may have for the private sector. And we want to reach all of them. So we strive to find solutions that can reach even the most difficult, the most frontier of the markets, how we can enable the private sector to intervene. And one thing that we do is we are increasing significantly our involvement with SMEs, including by financing local banks so that they can channel funding to local SMEs that will not be able to fund directly. Because the more of these SMEs we can create, indigenous SMEs, the more we have vehicles for receiving foreign investments from private sector players. Because ultimately the private sector investors would need to partner with local capital, with local investors, local companies that are capable, that have proven they can deliver. They just need a boost of capital. And creating that huge pool of potential recipients of foreign investment is critical. And that can only happen if we pump a lot of money, well-structured money through SMEs across all our countries, not just the countries that tend to attract all the capital. It's harder in some countries more than others, but at TDB, we have no favorites. We try to go after all of them, even the most difficult ones. So opportunities are there. They are massive. The challenges are there. They are known. We'll talk about them, but solutions are there too. And we are delivering them. We can create some new ones because we customize them by country, by environment, by sector. And that's what it will take to really be able to unlock funding into private sector of Africa and funding from the private sector coming from outside of the continent. Thank you.
Thank you very much, David. That was very insightful. I changed the order slightly. Now we're going back to Mr. Ken Shibusawa. Ken, the mic is yours. Thank you. Okay,
thank you very much, Muvemba. Good evening, everybody from Tokyo. It's the evening over here. Good morning to everybody on the other side. You may be wondering, why there's a Japanese guy talking about private investments into Africa? It's probably not the first thing you think about. It's not the first on the list of things you think about when you're investing privately into Africa. Hopefully, our conversation I could shed a little bit of light. Just to give you some personal background, my first aha moment with Africa came around 2008. In Japan, there was this conference called TCAD. It stands for Tokyo International Conference on African Development. And it was held in 2008, actually in Yokohama, not actually in Tokyo, but it was held there. And I was really surprised that this big conference that invited the heads of state of Africa to Japan to talk about development was started actually in 1993, right after the 1980s when Africa continent had a very, very difficult time. Then I started thinking about Africa, and then I was looking at some population forecasts for 2050, and I saw countries like Nigeria, Congo, Ethiopia, and I thought, wow. And Japan's currently number 10, but we fall to like number 17 or something in 2050. And so that was the aha moment for me, because we in Japan in the 21st century, we're going to have a declining population, a reverse pyramid. As has been mentioned, African continent has a very, very young population, and looks like a match in heaven when you put the two together. And that's when I got interested in Africa. Was thinking about Africa, and then going forward, five years later, we had TCAD 5. There was a call from the heads of state from Africa to the Japanese government. They basically said, "Thank you for so many years of aid. Now we would like to see investments into Africa." And that to me, that was a very encouraging sign, and for the private sector to come in to engage with Africa. Fast forward to present day, you look at the data actually, and actually direct investment to Africa from Japan actually has gradually decreased, where it's went up for countries like India and Vietnam. And so me, as a proponent for increasing the relationship with Africa and Japan, this is a really not a good sign. And so currently, with my work at the Japan Association of Corporate Executives, I've been on this committee for the last 10 years or so. We presented a proposition to form an African investment corporation, public-private sector initiative to engage not just any investment, but impact investing. Positive impact in environment, positive impact in environment on the society. It's just a proposal, and there's lots of details that need to be ironed out. But rest assured that there are people in Japan that want to increase this relationship with Africa, and in Japan and the private investments. Just one last note from my comment is that Japan 150 years ago, we were a developing country, and we were probably the first non-Western country to come to rise from the developing country to a developed country. We had a hiccup during the war years. It was a sad moment. But from 1960 to 1990, basically we had years of prosperity here. Made in Japan was a brand. But what happened after that, basically, because we were so successful, the United States got kind of angry at us. There was just sort of what we call bashing. And so what happened the next 30 years, from 1990 to 2000, to basically from 2020, is basically the last 30 years, is we went from, I'm sorry, we'll make it in your country, made by Japan. We went from made in Japan to made by Japan. I'm hoping in the future from now that we'll graduate from not just made in Japan, made by Japan, but made with Japan. So made with Japan, with Africa. And this is the vision that I personally have. And hopefully there are others that, that feel the same way. So just a small voice, in a big country, but hopefully we'll get things forward. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Ken. Very insightful as well. I like this concept of made with Japan. I think in Africa, various investors are waiting for those opportunities. At this moment, we'll move to the second part of our discussion, which will focus on two key issues: investment opportunities and high risks, high rewards. Let's start with Leslie. Leslie Marbury, the Prosper Africa initiative brings together services and resources from across the United States government to empower businesses with market insights, deal support, and solutions to strengthen business climate. Prosper Africa serves as a one-stop shop where US and African businesses and investors can access the full suite of US government services and resources. How does the initiative approach African markets? What is the magnitude of US investment in Africa? What is the profile of your investors? How do you address the challenges of financial inclusion or exclusion for that matter? And how do you satisfy environmental, social, and governance demands? Floor is yours, Leslie.
Thank you again, and that's a lot. I'll do my best with that question. So yes, Prosper Africa is a U.S. government initiative aiming to increase trade investment between the U.S. and countries in Africa, and we have 17 participating agencies that includes about 70 different trade investment tools that the U.S. government has. And the idea is to use these tools and resources to facilitate trade investment by providing businesses and investors with the support that they need, including solutions to overcome trade and investment barriers. And we do this by engaging directly with businesses and investors and mobilizing our support so that we can get them these packages of support that are more timely, accessible, and competitive. But we're not just waiting for these opportunities to come to us. We're also leading out on designing proactive new programming that develop new and nimble tools that capitalize on the U.S. strengths. And this really is us recognizing that the investor profile is very diverse. We have venture capital, which Mimi talked about, that is going wild right now and requires a certain approach. But we also have family offices. We have our private equity firms. We have foreign direct investment that is coming from U.S. businesses. And we're really trying to target also institutional investors. To my colleague David's point, there is still a huge demand for investing in infrastructure. And each one of these types of investors requires a completely different approach from the U.S. government as we look to support them. In terms of magnitude, since we were launched in June 2019, we've helped to close 800 deals, estimated to about 50 billion in exports and investments. And this isn't just in a few countries. While of course they're more concentrated in the countries you would suspect, these are in 45 countries around Africa. So I just wanted to touch on a couple of examples. I think one of the new, maybe more innovative aspects is how we're driving U.S. investment, engaging with our institutional investors. And we are expecting to close over $1 billion of U.S. private sector investment over the next 6 to 9 months via U.S. pension funds and other U.S. financial instruments, such as emerging market funds and housing bonds. And an example of how we're doing this, by addressing barriers to access to finance for home ownership, which is a critical gateway to building generational wealth. So through a partnership with DFC and USAID, Prosper Africa closed a groundbreaking $250 million affordable housing deal across 14 countries in West Africa. And this marks the first time an African bond issuer will access lower cost US bond markets. So we've tapped into US bond markets where interest rates are far lower than in West Africa, and it will significantly reduce the cost of financing for West African mortgages. This leads to greater home affordability, wealth creation, livelihoods across West Africa. And the bond issuance is expected to generate greater appetite for future issuances and lower their transaction cost. So it's kind of a pioneering deal that we are hoping to see more follow. So we think this will create appetite from both African issuers hungry for American liquidity, but also for American investors looking for yield and diversification. Success breeds success. Through other strategic investments, we're also addressing the challenges of financial inclusion that you were asking about. So as one example, again, I'll use a DFC example. DFC is providing CoreAid with a almost $15 million loan portfolio guarantee to expand credit access to small and medium-sized companies and microfinance institutions in West Africa. And this transaction also uses a blended finance model, including first loss capital to be provided by USAID's West Africa Trade Investment Hub. So it's connecting some foreign assistance with our Development Finance Corporation guarantees. And these are just a couple of examples of innovative ways that we're trying to meet investor demands. We understand there's still a lot of work to be done addressing risk for African markets and for US companies. And we're trying to address that by raising awareness about the markets of today, by showing African American businesses that the US government is prioritizing trade and investment with Africa, and that we bring a robust toolkit to the table that can help them maximize those opportunities.
Thank you very much, Leslie Marbury. Really enriching perspectives there. We will go to Mimi. You have extensive experience with emerging markets, particularly in Africa. Public-private partnerships have long been touted as the most effective approach to advancing sustainable development on the continent. Of course, this means that partners must be equally yoked and committed. Based on your experience, what are the obstacles to building successful public-private partnerships in Africa? How should we structure such partnerships so that they are truly responsive to the need of African populations? What mechanisms, if any, exist for mutual accountability? How do these partnerships account for the demands for financial inclusion and equity? I think today I want to insist on the inclusion and the equity. The mic is yours, Mimi.
Thank you. I think this is even a longer question than the one you gave to Leslie, but I'll try to get to most of it. First, I want to say that I think the way Leslie and her team are approaching Prosper Africa is really the right way. And if I may speak actually from my previous role and experience, I had the privilege of working on the Power Africa initiative, which was a bit similar, I would say, to Prosper Africa while in government. And then again, sort of on the private sector side, actually investing in the power sector. So I know when it's done right, it can really accelerate investment and truly also address the needs of the market. I remember during the planning phase of Power Africa, and this is really important, there was such a deliberate attempt to speak to as many African governments, African institutions, like the African Development Bank, and many more, and also private sector companies on both on the African side and the American side before we even started designing the program. And I think there was a lot of credible input that went into it from the African side, and I think that was important. And there was also a lot of commitment from the African government side to do the right thing, right, in creating the enabling environment for the industry to thrive. Is that, I think is driven largely by the public sector. So that part was also incredibly important. And I would say, without mentioning countries, some did better than others. And as they say, follow the money. You can usually tell who did well by where the capital flowed. There were some investors that completely left some markets. So it was not all perfect. From my own experience at a Blackstone portfolio company, Black Rhino. But I believe in general, Power Africa was quite responsible for attracting significant amount of capital into the power sector, particularly from American firms that were not really in that sector before then. And I think the design and the partnerships on both sides really helped with that. And I think to your point about sort of other institutions, I think the African Development Bank, where the US and many countries, including Japan, have actually significant shareholding. But it's also an institution that is owned by African nations. Nigeria, I believe, is sort of the largest shareholder. I believe those kind of institutions should really play a bigger role to structure partnership instead of creating newer ones, right? And also, this kind of helps your sort of your question about the mechanism for mutual accountability. And I think other regional players, the Africa Finance Corporation, and of course, David's own Trade and Development Bank. I remember when TDB was still PTA Bank, and I know David and the leadership there have done some incredibly amazing work in the last decade, and have really the project finance on infrastructure side that was really needed, and also kind of them diversifying their shareholder base, I think has really helped with that as well. And I really do think there's opportunity for private investors to invest alongside David and TDB and other regional institutions that have credibility and that have a track record in the region. It's a way to de-risk as well. Maybe I have to speak about MasterCard a little bit too. And we have also done quite a bit in terms of public-private partnership. And more recently, and this is even before the pandemic, we had partnered with Gavi, for example, the Vaccine Alliance, to launch our health solution, to create a very sort of a portable and secure digital vaccine record that puts the patient first. So basically, you enable health workers to reach children wherever they are, whether it's in a small village or a city. And this is not something that MasterCard could have done by ourselves, of course, because Gavi is an important partner in the health sector. And we both understood, right, the value that each of us brings. And together now we're planning to scale this wellness pass. We launched in Mauritania with the Ministry of Health. And now we're planning to actually also launch in Ethiopia sometime this year. And one of my favorite actually public-private partnership story is Ethiopian Airlines. My parents actually met while working at Ethiopian Airlines. So I actually wouldn't be here today if it wasn't for Ethiopian Airlines. But on a serious note, a lot of people don't know the story. But Ethiopian Airlines was started with a partnership between the Ethiopian government that approached a US private sector, the airline, TWA, to start an airline in that country. And it worked well because from the beginning, the government was sort of very clear on what they wanted to get accomplished and knew that they could not get it done alone. They needed the technology and skills that TWA would bring. But at the same time, they also put a timeline, and that helped. They wanted their own citizens trained and then take over. And I think the success of the airline sort of speaks for itself. And lastly, I think your question on financial inclusion, I think is an important one. And, I would say from MasterCard's sort of point of view, it's something that we've been incredibly committed to, way before I think it became sort of fashionable in DC and among donors. We have pledged, to connect 1 billion people and 50 million small businesses to the digital economy by 2025. And also we've committed to making sure that includes 25 million women entrepreneurs. This means, to be honest, that we have to continue to invest in Africa, and promoting and investing in the digital transformation taking place, I think, across the continent is something that we are very committed to. And lastly, I would just say, in spite of the infrastructure challenges, and David talked quite a lot about that, even though there's a lot of investment going into fintech and agtech, there isn't enough investment going into building roads and building power plants. I mean, there's still 600 million people that lack access to reliable power across the continent. But there's still some really exciting innovation taking place across the continent. I think we'll continue to invest and also, continue to partner with some of the fintechs that I think are truly transforming Africa's economy. I'll stop there. Thanks.
Thank you, Mimi. Learned quite a bit about how we can strengthen public-private partnerships and what type of commitment that will take. Ken Shibusawa, you have worked in the capital market for several years, and you are yourself an investor. From 2016 to 2018, Japan invested $20 billion in Africa. Entrepreneurship and enterprise, science, technology and innovation are prime areas of Japanese investment in Africa. This, of course, are also prominent characteristics of the Japanese brand. You spoke about the brand earlier. What are the status and level of Japanese investment in Africa today? How do Japanese investors approach African markets? What are the main barriers to Japanese investment in Africa? And how are Japanese businesses navigating those obstacles? How do Japanese investors approach the transfer of knowledge to African youth to foster the emergence of local leadership and promote sustainable partnerships with the Japanese? The mic is yours, Ken. 4 minutes.
Okay, Vimba, thank you so much for your questions. Very, very important. Let me try to answer it in this way. The hindrance for Japanese business going into Africa is just lack of experience. Africa is very, very far away from Japan. It's a lack of experience. It is probably the biggest hindrance. Having said that, though, there are companies that have made a major commitment into Africa. One company that I would like to bring to attention is they're not high tech, they're not 21st century kind of a company, but it's a company called Japan Tobacco, so a tobacco producer. But basically, over the last several years, they've committed more than $2 billion into Africa in terms of investments. They're in 31 countries, and they employ like 2,500 people in Africa. In addition to that, not just the investment part for the business, they think it's very important to co-create the community. And so they've engaged about over 500 million, I believe, in terms of lots of social engagement and community building. And so it would include things like hospitals, it would include like schools. There's problem with child labor in Africa, so they work with NGOs to make sure that that doesn't go on. So basically, I think there are companies that have made commitment into Africa, not just in terms of the capital, the money, but in terms of trying to build with the community. And I think that's an important factor. On the other spectrum, I'm not talking not the large companies, but actually you'll find, I found in the last 10 years, there's a growing population of young people here in Japan that want to do business with Africa. And they're more in the micro business area. One example that I could bring to you is, what we did was we established a consortium of Japanese corporations to support Japanese young entrepreneurs that want to do business in Africa. It wasn't an investment, but it was a grant, basically, for them to get started. And we've had this program for the last 6 years. The first person that we granted, her name is Chizu Nakamoto. She has a business in Uganda, and the business that she started is basically she wanted to provide employment for single mothers in Uganda because she was in Uganda and she saw that single mothers have a difficult time trying to get a job, and if you can't find a job to feed children, you have to resort to things that you should, you shouldn't be doing. And so she wanted to provide jobs. And so what she did was she designed using colorful African prints into this really fashionable bags, fashion bags, and she sells it in Japan. And so it's a way to provide employment to the underprivileged in Africa, in a fashion brand. It's not a great big business, but in terms of micro businesses, I think she's doing really a good job. And she's building a brand actually here in Japan for doing that. And so, there's a spectrum from these large investments into Africa, committed large corporations. They're not many, but they're there. As I mentioned, Japan Tobacco, Toyota Tsusho has been in Africa for a long time. I'm sure having the Toyota Cruiser have made lots of Africans very, very, made their lives a lot easier having the Toyota Cruiser in Africa, right? And so, so there are companies that have made a commitment, but they're, these smaller, younger generation that's actually more nimble, much, much smaller, but they're committed to working with Africa. To bring a better community, bring a better society, to bring opportunities to especially the underprivileged. So I kind of mentioned earlier about how Japan emerged from a non-emerging country. And the reason why Japan was able to do that, there's different factors, but one is education. Japanese society, they educated the people basically. Another big driver was health, public health, and these sort of basic human needs is something that really any investment opportunity has to rest on these foundations, these basic human needs. And I think Japan, in terms of that, has had a pretty good track record over the last decades in terms of supporting Africans in terms of different kinds of support to increase that kind of basic human needs. And so I think the important thing for Japan going forward is to integrate that sort of Japan, that's what Japan's been doing with the capital, with the commitment, as I mentioned, to build with the Africans. One of Japan's, I guess I would call it advantage with Africa, is the fact that, in a sense, we don't have a legacy with Africa, negative or positive in a sense. So it's basically what we call a blue ocean, and there are other players that are not Western that are in Africa, like China and Korea, but if you think about it, democratic societies with thriving businesses, large and small. I think Japan has a pretty good positioning in terms of working with Africa to have prosperity going forward. So I kind of want to bring in that angle. It's the large amount of capital commitments, obviously very, very important. But there are these micro movements, coming into Africa from especially the younger generation. So please keep an eye on them. Thank you.
Thank you, Ken. I appreciate that. David, we'll have to give you 3 minutes. We're running a bit tight on time and we have a couple questions still coming in, but these are great perspective that your entire panel has shared with us, so we'll stick with them. You have worked on both on the private and institutional sides of the investment spectrum. You are now based in Nairobi working for a regional financial institution. The Trade and Development Bank finances and fosters trade and regional economic integration. TDB's offering include trade finance and sustainable development project and infrastructure finance, and seek to advance regional economic development and prosperity. How does TDB approach regional markets? What is the magnitude of your investment and what is the profile of the investor? You've heard this question before, it was given to your colleagues earlier. What are the structural and legal obstacles that discourage foreign private investment in Africa? How do you address the challenges of financial inclusion? And how do you satisfy environmental, social, and governance demand? Also, equally importantly, what advice would you give reluctant foreign investors who may be contemplating business opportunities in Africa? Thank you.
Thank you, Weber. Since I have 3 minutes, let me choose my questions. Let me focus on the barriers, the legal and structural barriers, and a few advice to investors. We may have heard them already, but let me just capture them in 2 buckets. Operational risk is the biggest risk that investors tend to associate African investment with. That's legal risk, regulatory risk, corruption, regulatory uncertainties, and sometimes civil unrest, operational risk. It tends to be on top of the list of most investors as the reason why they're afraid of coming to Africa. And the concern is fair. Many African countries struggle with security issues, with political stability. Every election cycle tends to be a moment of concern for citizens and for investors, and people have to leave the countries and watch from the distance, and then see if it doesn't blow up, then they come back. It's tough to put billions in that kind of environment when every 4 years or 5 years you have to pray to dear Lord that the country survives. That's a serious problem for Africa. So operational risk is big in all its forms. And the other major barrier is a high cost of capital, capital, whether it's equity returns people are expecting because of the high risk, or debt financing. It's just way too expensive. If you are a foreign investor, you're trying to invest in Africa, you need some leverage. Where do you go to get the money? Because your domestic banks will not come with you to Africa. They will say, we don't want to lend to you in Africa. Thank you very much. How do you finance your investment in Africa when you are a foreign investor trying to put a bit of money down and needing debt to accompany you? It's difficult. It becomes hard to raise the capital needed to make the investment work. So what are the solutions? One big one has been mentioned by other speakers, and I need to thank Mimi for mentioning TDB here, and the work that we do, the partnerships that we create. As my group managing director, Masu Tadese, likes to say, TDB is a PPP in of itself. TDB is owned by African states primarily. However, it also has institutional investors and other African institutions. The African Development Bank is one of the largest investor. And we have African pension funds that have invested in our Class B shares. And we are inviting other investors to come and invest in our Class B shares. We have IFU and OFID and other non-African funds and institutions also coming into our Class B shares as a way of channeling their African investments in a manner that mitigates some of the risks that they may just not be able to fathom. TDB as an investment grade entity is able to serve as an intermediary for those kind of investments coming into Africa through our intermediation, because we know African risk. We don't run away when elections happen because we live here. It's our continent, it's our country. We know how to mitigate that risk. We know how to manage that risk on a post-election basis. Whoever wins or whatever happens, will be there. We'll be there to manage the risk. So one big solution to these risks is partnerships. Find the right partners to work with who are on the continent, who know the continent, who will not park and go because they belong, because they are there, they are grounded. Find those partners. You find the right partners like TDB and similar regional development bank, similar institutions. Many of the risks that you fear will be mitigated, and your investment will have a lot of good to achieve because it will be channeled in manners that will reach a lot more people. And be patient. Be patient. Don't come to Africa hoping to exit in 5 years. It just may not work. Africa needs patient capital. You come, try to stretch your investment horizon. Don't come with a typical 5-7 year exit plan. It just may not work. Most likely it won't work. You need to allow more time. Be patient. We will work through those challenges. They are not that much different from the bureaucracy in other countries, to tell you the truth. It may take years to get your permit in other big cities in North America before you can start the construction projects. So we have our own challenges in Africa, but it's just not that much different from other countries once you remove some of the other structural issues. So just be patient and we can work through those risks with the right partnerships. Vemba, I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mimi, I know you said you need to go right away. We have an extra 5 minutes for the rest of the panel. Do you have 20 seconds to answer a question? You have to run.
No, I'm going to stay the extra 5 minutes.
Okay, thank you. Therefore, we really appreciate this. Thank you. So the first question will go to you, actually, Mimi. For someone who's interested in driving US private sector investment in Africa, i.e., as a government official or private sector rep, in what capacity can they do so most effectively?
Is this question about sort of investing in Africa? I wasn't clear, but
Yeah, so the question is about someone who's interested in driving US private sector investment in Africa. I presume they're playing the role of steering the funds that way. So in what capacity can they do so most effectively?
I think the fastest way and the easiest way, especially if they don't know the continent very well, is to partner with organizations like TDB Bank, a regional bank. Is when I was at OPIC, our largest investors in the continent were the diaspora who live in this country, whether it's Ghanaian Americans or Nigerian Americans, who have a much more longer term perspective. As David was saying, that these are people that are not like at the next election that will like pack up and leave, and they tended to be our best partners. So when we were pushing investments when I was there and opened our first regional offices while I was there, that's who we partnered with most of the time. And looking at our NPLs while I was there, what shocked me the most, Africa always pays a premium on risk, and David would agree. But regionally, our NPLs in Africa were actually the lowest when I was at OPIC. It shocked me, even me being originally from the continent, to know that. Even I didn't expect to see that when I said, I want to see our NPLs by region, to see Africa being the lowest. And that's because I think we do have, Africa gets, quite a premium on risk. But, those are the things I would say. Get a local partner, make sure you co-invest alongside somebody that knows the environment.
Thank you very much, Mimi. Thank you very much. We have 2 questions left. So I'll read them. Either one of the panelists can take them. We have 3 minutes to go. So your response will be commensurate to the time we have left. How can public-private partnerships protect Africa and its people from predatory lending and financing while actively seeking significant foreign investment? Question number 1. Question number 2, which sector do you think has the potential in attracting investment to Ethiopia? So those are open questions. Anyone can take it. We have 3 minutes.
I can take the
PPP one.
Okay, David, and then Mimi, and then Ken, if you want to jump in, or Leslie as well. So before we conclude.
Yeah, thank you. Very good question. I mean, the answer lies somewhere in what Mimi said earlier about the example Mimi gave of Ethiopian Airlines. The African side must lead in these discussions. The African side must have clarity on what it wants to get out of these arrangements. The government part of the African side must have clarity on what they want to get out of it to defend their interests in that arrangement. Otherwise, it's being a commercial negotiation. They may get the short end of the stick if they don't negotiate right. And there, I recognize that the capacity to negotiate is sometimes limited for government, and that's why TDB has partnered with the African Legal Support Facility, ALSF, to provide capacity building to government lawyers. We just concluded a very successful training in Nairobi here for over 60 government lawyers from across African countries on PPPs to help them negotiate, to equip them on how to negotiate these arrangements. The African side must lead the discussions, must have the capacity to engage lawyers, to negotiate as equal partners in those deals. That's the only way, I think, they can defend their interest and avoid predatory transactions.
Thank you very much, David. Mimi, you want to respond to the Ethiopian question, and then we'll go to either Ken or Leslie.
Yeah, sure. On the Ethiopia opportunity, I think some of the sectors I would say is for sure, Ethiopia was probably the only country left, I think, in this world that where the government controlled, the mobile network operator. And last year they issued a license, and I believe there's going to be another sort of license issued. So a lot in sort of mobile network on digital. I think the country has a huge strategy to digitize many things. And so on that, there's a huge opportunity. But more recently, I think about last week, they've declared they will open up financial services now for the first time. As you may know, that country has been closed for foreign investment in the financial sector. So this is like a huge deal, what happened, I think what was announced last week. So a lot of opportunities for private investors in financial services in the country for the very first time. So I think that's pretty big. I'm sure David and even Ken will be, even the Japanese banks will be looking at that market. It's a country with 100 million people. So I'm a little bit biased. I was born in Addis Ababa, so, but I would put my bet on financial services.
Thank you very much, Mimi. We have about 45 seconds left. Ken or
15,
Leslie?
15 seconds. And in Japan, we have lots of capital. Neither public or private sector capital is not, I've never heard of a predatory lending or financing practice out of Japan. Our problem is not knowing the continent. And so, Mimi and David provide the answers. We just need to find the right partners. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Ken. Leslie?
Thanks for letting me participate. If anybody needs more information on Prosper Africa, how to partner with us, please go to prosperafrica.gov. We have transaction advisors and others that are waiting to engage with people. Thanks.
Well, thank you very much to our audience. I'd like to thank the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Japan for making this event possible and for the support. And please join me in thanking our distinguished panelists today, Leslie Marbury, Mimi Alemayu, Ken Shibusawa, and David Bamlango. We have a lot of takeaways that I could not enumerate here, but we all were here for the program, so we all heard them. This concludes our meeting. Again, thank you for participating and joining us, and have a good day.